This man's prison escape could be considered the height of suspense, given that around the prison at that time, police and special agents were more numerous than the Yuan army. And yet, he only needed a few simple items and still successfully created a one-of-a-kind prison escape in history. First, he used a marker pen to draw precise lines on the floor. These lines would help him identify the blind spot where he couldn't be seen from outside. Next, he punched through the glass window, then carried some gas cylinders and placed them in a corner. Then, he lifted the guard he had just knocked unconscious up to the window, intentionally letting the sniper on the other side see him. After that, he pulled him aside and swapped clothes with him. Once that was done, he slapped him a few times to wake him up, then pretended to let him attack from behind. The guard thought he had caught him, so he struggled forcefully to put him in a chokehold. Seizing that opportunity, he dragged him near the window, right into the sniper's line of sight. He made it look like the guard was being attacked by the prisoner, so the sniper, after identifying the target, pulled the trigger and shot the guard dead. A second bullet also hit the gas cylinder, causing the area to explode violently. He quickly ran down to a corner and hid there. Everyone still thought the escaping prisoner was dead, unaware that he was already on the paramedic stretcher, getting out of the prison without anyone knowing. While in the ambulance, he met a woman, and this person was an FBI agent. Why did the FBI agent spot the prisoner but do nothing to apprehend him? It turned out this guy's name was Peter, an undercover FBI agent. Previously, he had infiltrated a gangster syndicate. He and his team were preparing to execute a major operation, which was casting a wide net to catch both the buyers and the sellers. To carry out that plan, the organization had planted Peter as a henchman for the boss, but this boss was very cunning. He never involved rookies or small fry in his drug dealings. To help Peter gain the boss's favor, the FBI had to use 6 kilograms of synthetic drugs as bait by staging a transport operation, and Peter would be the one escorting the goods. The fact that he alone managed to transport 6 kilograms of drugs and evade the police made them deeply trust and respect him. That also helped Peter gain the boss's trust. This time, he allowed him and a group of underlings to conduct a trade transaction. It was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, so Peter and his team planned meticulously. First, to ensure the safety of his wife and child, Peter would go home and take his wife and child to a secret location. They agreed to meet again at 1 p.m. the next day. He didn't forget to put the key around his wife's neck and told her that if he didn't return by then, she should open the door and take the child away. And if anyone came looking for them during that time, she must absolutely not open the door. After taking care of everything for his wife and child, he went to his teammates and prepared the remaining tasks with them. Erica, the FBI special agent team leader, gave him a recording device. He hid it inside his pants in case of searches or detection. Additionally, he was given a phone, in which several numbers were saved under the names of parents, siblings, but were actually his teammates' numbers. After double-checking the signal to be sure, he started heading to the transaction point with a few other henchmen of the boss. Peter's other teammates always followed him at a safe distance to provide support if needed. Peter's mission this time was to bring back 6 kilograms of goods for the boss with his close associate. When the boss held the drugs in his hands, they would rush in to arrest him and sweep his den clean. However, on the way to the job, his drug dealer found a big spender. This person was willing to pay a very high price. Not wanting the plan to fall apart, Peter seemed reluctant to make the deal, but this guy said the buyer was clean, rest assured. When they went inside to make the transaction, the buyer thought they only had half to 1 kilogram of powder. When he said he had 6 kg, the buyer was very surprised. He didn't know how they managed to pass the checkpoint successfully carrying that much powder here, but he said he couldn't buy that much right now. He could only buy half first. The rest would be arranged later. Peter didn't want to sell to him anymore. In reality, being in the business, he knew this person was a New York police officer. He didn't want the baked goods he brought out to fall into police hands, rendering it all useless. So he had to pretend to be suspicious that this person was a cop and refused to sell to him anymore, despite the man's attempts to prove he wasn't a cop. But Peter kept insisting he was a cop. A nearby henchman, without saying a word, opened fire on this undercover police officer without needing any proof, despite Peter saying they shouldn't mess with the New York police if they still wanted to do business. But this guy kept firing several more shots into him. After the officer was killed, Peter pretended to be stressed and went outside to wait for his FBI colleagues to pick him up. However, his teammates monitoring outside had witnessed the entire story inside. They worried their plan was exposed, so they left without intending to take him along. At this point, Peter realized he had been abandoned. He was very sad and bitter. He had risked his life for them, and now he was being treated no differently than a dog. Having no other choice, he had to go back inside and help them dispose of the body. Otherwise, they would suspect his identity. After everything was done, Peter reported to the boss. He was quite worried because the deal failed and involved the New York police, so it was highly likely they wouldn't leave them alone. But the boss didn't do anything to him. He gave him a new mission as redemption for the failed one, which was to go to prison to expand the drug market for him, both to calm public opinion after the police shooting incident and to increase his revenue. Truly killing two birds with one stone. The prison term for him was 5 years. Peter didn't want to do this, but he threatened him with his wife and child. Right now, his wife and child were in their hands. If he didn't want them harmed, he had to obey him obediently. He promised him that while he was in prison, they would take good care of his wife and child. In this situation, Peter could only obey them. Returning home, he called Erica asking why she abandoned him. But she said because he deviated from the plan, they could lose the entire 6 kilograms of drugs. That night, the boss's henchmen disposed of the police officer's body in the river. Before throwing the body down, they even gouged out his eyes and cut out his tongue. They called it practicing the Polish ritual. The next morning, the body was quickly discovered. The police launched an investigation into the officer's death. Among them was a bald, black inspector. He looked at the body and guessed it was the work of the Poles. Not only that, he also had video footage, video from the cafe where the murder occurred, which included a segment showing Peter walking out shortly after the officer went in. The inspector suspected Peter was one of the men who had killed the undercover cop. At this time, the inspector also noticed a girl. This person had previously been an informant for the unfortunate police officer. But when the inspector tried to approach the girl for information, his overly aggressive actions scared the girl, so he couldn't get anything out of her. Fortunately, his female colleague who was with him helped him get a few names. When tracing those names, upon reaching Peter, both paid the most attention to him. The file stated he was a former veteran, a sniper, convicted of manslaughter, sentenced to 20 years in prison. But at this point, his file seemed to have been altered by the FBI to a 4-year suspended sentence pending a full investigation. The inspector said they needed to look into this person more carefully, but touching FBI files was not easy. It required time. At this time, Peter also went to meet Erica. But instead of having his superiors handle the matter, he was ignored by the organization. They had no responsibility to resolve the troubles he caused. Although they initially brought him in and he had to work for them, now that things went wrong, they made him bear all the responsibility. His presence when the police officer was shot made him an accomplice, and no one could save him. There was only one way to help him conceal his identity, which was to follow the boss's way, go to prison and eat state meals. Erica said his going to prison was not only to expand the territory for him, but also to get a complete list of the prisoners, the guards involved in drug trafficking inside. That was also the way to help him earn merit and gain freedom. Peter couldn't believe what he was hearing. The boss wanted him in prison, but he had thought the organization would help him get out of this mess, yet they paid him no attention and wanted him to do as he was told. How ridiculous. If he refused this, he would be arrested and could face a 12-year sentence along with a series of other charges falling from the sky. He could only laugh bitterly because now, whatever he said, nobody would believe him. When they left, Peter pulled out the tape recorder that recorded the conversation just now. It would be evidence to help him clear his name later if needed. The next morning, the boss's men came to Peter's house. The boss's nephew informed him that the boss wanted to see him and wanted to come to his house for a farewell dinner before he went to prison. Compared to those damn FBI colleagues, he seemed kinder to him. Before leaving, he questioned him about where he went last night, but he acted flustered. He signaled him and said his wife was home. He should watch his mouth. This guy thought he went out whoring. He seemed very happy that a serious person like him could also misbehave like himself. After he left, Peter had to tell his wife the truth about him going to prison soon. She seemed to find it hard to accept because if he went in this time, there was no knowing if he could get out. With only 2 days left with his wife and child, he wanted to spend time with his daughter and prepare her mentally for his long absence from home. That evening, he took a bouquet of tulips, put the drugs into small packets, and stuffed them inside the flowers to serve as criminal evidence. The next day, under the pretext of taking his daughter to the movies, he met Erica and discussed the plan to enter prison. They promised to keep his wife and child in an FBI-safe house while he was in prison. Before carrying out the next plan, he wanted them to meet 3 demands. First, conduct a large-scale drug raid after he entered prison to cut off competing supply sources. Only then could he distribute his goods to bait the prey. Second, work with the warden to get him into the rehabilitation program. After returning home from the cinema with his daughter, the boss and his wife came to his house for a special farewell ceremony. When the couple left, they didn't know the inspector had been watching him since who knows when. He recognized the boss and called his partner to report the situation. The next morning, while the inspector was still busy monitoring the family, Inside the house, Peter and his wife pulled out all their dishes to stage a play. When his wife called the police, he used a stick to smash the dishes vigorously to make noise. She called the police reporting that she was being abused by her husband. To make it more convincing, she took a shard of a bowl and cut her face. While the inspector was still searching for information, the police had already rushed to the house and arrested Peter right before his surprised eyes. It turned out the plan for Peter to enter prison perfectly without anyone suspecting was to create a case of a husband abusing his wife. Everything went according to his plan without anyone having the slightest suspicion. After entering prison, the guards quickly recognized him. They thought he was back to his old ways, so they didn't pay much attention. He was put into a cell. Here he met two of the boss's underlings. They quickly connected and got acquainted. Then, they gave him a knife for self-defense when needed. At this time, the bald inspector also came to Erica's FBI office and told them about his suspicions. He found some evidence suggesting Peter was an FBI asset, someone they had released from prison, and altered his records. Not only that, the inspector also presented some photos showing the presence of FBI near the area where the police officer was killed, including one photo showing someone inside who looked very much like Erica. Faced with the inspector's evidence, both could only remain silent. But they didn't have enough evidence, so he couldn't expose everything. Right after entering prison, the head guard didn't forget to remind him that all their business dealings inside had to go through him. As per his request, the very next day, police and sniffer dogs were brought to the prison for a special raid. All their drugs and those of others were confiscated. But that was a good opportunity for him to restart his business because only he had the goods. Also, to gather information, Peter was assigned to the roof maintenance team as initially desired. That night, his wife put the drugs inside a dead bird. Then, she and the boss's nephew used a remote-controlled drone to drop the bird onto the prison roof. It rained that night, so the next morning Peter's team was sent up to clean the roof. Seeing the dead bird, he guessed it was the goods he needed, so he quickly put it in the trash bag. That evening, the bald inspector also came to Peter's house and met his wife. He said that someone had killed a friend of his, and he suspected it was Peter, but now he was hesitant because it involved the FBI. The inspector said he came to help her husband, but she only said that 5 years ago, she and her husband went into a store and were taunted by a group of people. Peter didn't let them get away with it, so he took action, and from that day on, her husband became a killer. But also since then, everyone who said they wanted to help them did the opposite, so she didn't trust anyone at all and sent the inspector away. He still didn't forget to leave her his contact number and said to call him if needed. Inside the prison now, Peter had the drugs, so he started his trading business. However, because he took over their turf, the gang leader inside wouldn't leave him alone. Very quickly, they took him to a common room. The head guard used a baton to knock him down. Then, he had his henchmen hang him to stage a suicide death. Although Peter was already hanging high, he still used all his strength to tell them that he was an FBI informant. He came here for them to arrest all their boss's henchmen and then bring down his empire. Just give him the list of those who did business with him, and they could take down the boss, then become the rulers of the prison. Hearing this, they immediately released him. But they gave him 3 hours. If he survived, they would give him the list. At this time, Erica's superior also called her out. He said the New York police were investigating Peter and sooner or later they would arrest him, then investigate the FBI's involvement in a prisoner's file and turning him into their operative. Erica said Peter would have the list in just a few more days, then they would have nothing to fear. But he didn't want to continue this plan anymore. He wanted them to abandon Peter. She didn't want this to happen because the entire plan was directed by him. Yet now he was shirking all responsibility and saying she only carried it out to curry favor with superiors. If she insisted, he could have her imprisoned. Finally, he concluded with a very firm sentence: abandon him. That night, when Peter went to the restroom, a black inmate entered the restroom with him. He handed him a piece of paper listing all the dealers and the guards who aided the dealers. The next morning, while the prisoners were cleaning, Peter was secretly passing the obtained list to the guard and requesting to be moved to solitary confinement. However, his request was not met. Peter didn't understand what was happening. When it was time for phone calls, he contacted Erica to ask for the reason, but she answered the phone and remained silent. Only then did he realize they had double-crossed him again. He had a bad feeling about his wife and child, so he called his wife to report the situation and told her to take the child and hide. Peter's wife also knew her husband was in trouble, so she told him about the police inspector investigating the case and wanting to help them. Peter told his wife to give the inspector the audio tapes and go into hiding. But as she was preparing to take the tapes to the bald inspector, Erica appeared. She used a gun to threaten her, forcing her to hand over the tapes. Finally, after getting the audio tapes, she left some money and told her to hide as soon as possible. After obtaining the tapes, Erica listened to them again and realized Peter had secretly recorded all the conversations between them, including her promises to Peter if he accepted the mission. Erica felt immensely guilty. She had dragged Peter into this, but when danger arose, she abandoned him and his family. As for Peter, after realizing he had been double-crossed by the FBI, he also made his own plan. That day, taking advantage of fewer people in the cell, he secretly took some books from his cellmates, stuffed them all around his body, and wrapped cloth around both hands. Then, he flipped his bed up and took out a small knife he had hidden there earlier. But he searched and couldn't find the knife. While engrossed in searching, he was attacked from behind by an inmate. This guy had a sharp nail in his hand. He wanted to use this object to stab Peter to death. The two grappled fiercely for quite some time. Finally, Peter sent this guy logging off from Earth. Then, he dragged him to the middle of the room where the camera had the clearest view. This attracted the guards. One quickly pressed the alarm bell and called his superiors about a fight in prison. Peter held a piece of mirror right at the stairwell entrance, while he himself hid somewhere to observe. He quickly ran out, knocking the guard out on the spot. He took him hostage, held the sharp nail to his temple, threatening everyone to stay away if they wanted this guy alive. He dragged him up to the ventilation room, then handcuffed him and pulled the nail out of his neck. At this moment, he noticed the ventilation fan and the window facing outside. He took a marker pen there and drew lines on the floor to mark the boundary of the blind spot invisible from outside. Meanwhile, at his home, the boss found out about what he did in prison and sent his nephew to deal with his wife and child. This guy and his henchmen brought 2 cans of gasoline to Peter's house. He intended to burn his wife and child alive. When they were about to harm the mother and daughter, the bald inspector arrived just in time. He managed to shoot and kill one of them, but the other one hid. Upon entering the room where the mother and daughter were held, being careless, he was shot in the leg by this guy hiding behind the bed. He was holding Peter's daughter hostage. Then, he left the little girl on the bed to look for the inspector. Taking advantage of that moment, Peter's wife managed to untie herself. When this guy found the inspector, he was dragging himself down the stairs to escape. But it was too late. He was about to give him a lead candy to meet his ancestors, but luckily Peter's wife was behind him and grazed his head with a bullet. Taking advantage of that moment, the inspector grabbed his hand and used all his strength to turn the gun towards this guy and pulled the trigger. The incident of Peter taking a hostage had spread everywhere. The FBI also received the news. They immediately sent people to the scene. Snipers were also positioned on all sides. As soon as Peter appeared, he would be taken down by them. At this moment, he was still diligently preparing all the props for the life and death battle. He carried a gas cylinder to the window and left it there. Through the glass, he saw police had surrounded everywhere. His escape route was almost zero. At this moment, a police officer approached to negotiate with him, saying he would give him a phone to call his wife and child. Erica's boss also arrived. He knew Peter had been given a phone to call his wife and child, so he instructed his men that if he called his wife and child, let him talk. But if he called the press, the connection must be cut. He didn't want Peter to expose everything he did, so he took a step ahead. At this time, Peter was allowed to call his wife and child. Knowing they were safe, he felt greatly relieved and started preparing his work. He had promised them he would return, so he couldn't break his promise. This plan required him to be extremely careful. He put on the guard's clothes and put his clothes on the guard. Then, he woke the guard up and let him put his arms around his neck. This guy thought it was easy prey and used all his strength intending to choke Peter. But the harder he tried to choke him, the more it suited Peter's plan. He did this so that the sniper looking from afar would think the guard had him under control. Then, just as predicted, the bullet flew out just as Peter pulled the guard down with him, causing it to hit the gas cylinder, puncturing it and causing an explosion. Peter quickly dove to the floor below and hid there. The horrific explosion in the attic made everyone think Peter was dead. They carried the guard away for treatment, not knowing that person was actually Peter. Erica saw his tattooed hand and knew the dead person wasn't Peter. She used her FBI authority to accompany the person to the hospital in the ambulance. Feeling remorseful for breaking her promises to him, she chose to let him escape. She gave Peter some necessary documents so he could find shelter somewhere, while she voluntarily handcuffed herself along with the medical staff, faking that Peter stole a gun, threatened them, and escaped. Afterward, she went to her superior and told him she had recognized Peter as soon as she was in the ambulance, but had let him go. The superior demanded she reveal his current location. Erica didn't want to say, but eventually, she confessed. However, just as the boss was about to set off to arrest Peter, the bald inspector arrived and arrested him. It turned out Erica was the one who had revealed all of the boss's actions to the police. He would be temporarily arrested for further investigation. At the end of the film, Erica brought Peter's wife and child to the park so he could see them. Peter could only watch his beloved wife and child from afar. He couldn't approach them because the moment he showed his face, the undercover police present everywhere would grab him. The bald inspector unexpectedly approached and gave him some passport documents along with a message from Erica. He had to go away for a while for things to gradually settle down. She would arrange for his whole family to be reunited. That might be the only good thing to do for their family right now, also as repayment for what he sacrificed for the organization. Peter and his wife also saw each other. They were happy and joyful that everything was finally peaceful.